this crazy world, it's so hard to unwind. So I'm taking time just for me. Gonna find my peace, let my soul be free. In the quiet moments, that's where I'll find a little room to breathe, leave it all behind. Give me room to breathe, I need some time to heal my heart, to clear my mind. Gonna love myself, yeah, I believe in the power of me. Just give me room to breathe.
Great new day to all my self-care family and friends. Welcome back to another Room to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Life Coach 614, and I am so happy that you guys have made space to be here with us today. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I need for you all to do me a quick favor. If you're feeling our vibes, go ahead and show some love. Tap that screen, like, comment, but most importantly, I need everyone to share this live out with someone who could use a little healing energy today. And if this is your first time here or you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit that follow button. Subscribe to our channel so that way you're always tapped in when a new episode drops. I also want to invite you to check out our digital home at theselfcareclub.org, where you will find every single thing that you need, from affirmative apparel to motivational merch, as well as a ton of free resources to help nourish your growth and remind you that you are supported every step of the way. Just know that you don't have to do this alone. We are healing in community, growing one breath, one moment, one day at a time. So today, I encourage you to give yourself permission to pause, reflect, and to make space for peace, for growth, but most importantly for you. And remember, if anything in today's episode hits home, be sure to drop those green hearts in the chat. That is our community's way of saying I am healing, I am growing, and I am showing up for me. Now, let's get ready to breathe, reflect, and grow together. All right, guys, how are we all feeling today? It is Wednesday. All right. We made it to the middle of the week. For those of us who have those 9 to 5s and, Monday through Friday work weeks, for people who work on the weekends, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But we still made it to the middle of this week, right? I'm feeling good. Brick says drained. Okay, we got some drained. What do we say? I'm tired as hell, but I'm alive and well, right? That's probably the energy that I have today. Tired as hell, but alive and well. But I am definitely excited to share the word for today. I think that, as always, it's going to relate with a lot of us. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. Let me get this posted so that way we can get this pinned. We can start pronouncing this together, because y'all, I'm telling y'all, this word was work today. So we're going to break it down, okay? The word is Palingenesis. But when we break it down slowly, it breaks down into pal, like friend, pal. And then Lee, so Palingenesis, just the word you see, Genesis. So it's Palingenesis, right? I'm sorry, Palingenesis. I keep saying Palin. Palin, okay? So pal, like friend, in, like enter the room, and then Genesis. Palingenesis. All right? And so I want us to sit with this word for a moment. Palingenesis. The word palingenesis means rebirth after collapse, or the renewal after something has broken down. Just like it looks. Palingenesis. Absolutely. So again, it just means rebirth after collapse. Hey, Carmen, I see you up there. Hey, girl. Hey. So the word palingenesis, it's not a glow up. It's not a quick reset. It's not the kind of change that comes from rearranging a few things. Yes, as in Phoenix Rising vibes. Girl, she gets it. Okay. See, Palingenesis is deeper than, that kind of shift, from rearranging a few things on the surface and calling it growth. Palingenesis describes the kind of transformation that happens after something in your life falls apart. After the identity that you thought you were holding no longer fits. After the relationship that once felt secure starts to crack. After the career, the dream, the belief system, or even the version of yourself that you were performing begins to collapse under the weight of the truth. Yes, absolutely. It is a Greek word for spiritual rebirth. Absolutely. And so when most people hear the word rebirth, their mind immediately paints this beautiful picture. Joanna, welcome in. Right? Your mind immediately goes to something inspiring, something empowering, something that looks like a phoenix rising from the ashes with confidence and clarity. But the truth is, real rebirth rarely starts that way. Real rebirth often starts in a place that feels quite messy, right? It starts in the quiet moments when you realize the life that you built doesn't feel aligned anymore. It starts when the roles that you've been playing, the strong one, the fixer, the peacemaker, the overachiever, the caretaker, right? When those roles suddenly feel too heavy for you to keep carrying. It starts when you wake up one day and you think something inside of me has shifted. Welcome in, Erica. Something inside of me has shifted and I don't know what to do with it yet. Thank you for the finger heart. Because before rebirth comes the breakdown, right? Before clarity comes the confusion. Before peace comes the uncomfortable truth that something in your life can no longer stay the same. And so before this new version of you arrives, the old version has to fall apart first. Yes, exactly. Come on, Candace. Candace knew the Encanto vibes. For those of you who have seen the movie Encanto, you get it. It is definitely like Louisa. And, like I said, that before the new version of you can arrive, that old version has to fall apart first, right? And that's the part that I think that people don't always talk about. The grief that comes with outgrowing who you used to be, the discomfort in seeing situations and sometimes people, right? Seeing them more clearly. Survivor Rose, welcome in, love. And so there's this loneliness that can come when the version of you that kept everything stable no longer exists. But here's where the word gets even more interesting. Sometimes what breaks down, thank you so much. Sometimes what breaks down isn't just circumstances. Sometimes what breaks down is the identity that you were performing, right? Sometimes the collapse reveals something deeper, right? Either the real you finally emerging or the truth about someone else whose mask has fallen off. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Not just rebirth, right? But what actually breaks, what actually emerges, and how to tell the difference between the real transformation and someone simply removing a mask. Because I definitely think that it is important to, spotlight both things. And we have to understand that not every unmasking is healing. Not every change is growth. And not every breakdown means that you're losing yourself. Sometimes you're just finally becoming honest enough to meet the person that you were always meant to be. So let's go ahead and jump right into this, where sometimes palingenesis doesn't begin with tragedy, right? Sometimes it just simply begins with exhaustion. And not the kind of exhaustion that sleep fixes, but that deep soul level exhaustion that comes from living a life that doesn't fully match who you are anymore. The exhaustion of being constantly who everybody else needs you to be. The exhaustion of carrying roles that once made sense, but no longer feel aligned with your spirit. No fear, no doubt. Welcome in. Rose, thank you so much for sharing the live. I think that many of us learned early, that, many of us learned early in life that, certain versions of ourselves were more acceptable than others, right? Don, welcome in. Thank you so much for the follow. So because we learned this very early on, we adjust, right? We become who the room responds to well, the responsible one, the strong one, the agreeable one, that helper, the fixer, the one who always keeps the peace. And for a long time, those roles served a purpose for us, right? They helped us navigate our family dynamics, our workplaces, our friendships, and our relationships. But over time, something subtle begins to happen. You start to realize that the version of you that keeps everything functioning is not always the version of you that feels free. Shonda, welcome in. You start noticing moments where you're smiling, but your spirit feels quiet. And Joanna, Erica, I don't know if I spoke yet, but hey girl, hey, I see y'all. Right? We start to notice where, moments where we're showing up for everybody else, but not fully showing up for ourselves. And at first, what do? We ignore it, right? Cadillac, Jersey Rican, we ignore it. We tell ourselves that this is just what life requires. This is just who I am, right? This is just what being dependable looks like. But eventually that performance starts to feel too heavy to carry. And that's where those breakdowns begin. And it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, right? You stop forcing conversations that drain you. You stop volunteering for the roles that exhaust you. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. And now all of a sudden you're starting to question things that you used to automatically accept. And when that happens, suddenly people notice, right? That's when they pull up saying things like, you've changed. You're not the same anymore. You used to be so easygoing. And, when I think about it, in some ways, they're right. Because the identity that kept everyone comfortable is starting to crack. So, in some ways, they're right. That moment when the performance begins to fall away is often the first stage of palingenesis, right? The beginning of the rebirth. And it's not because you're suddenly becoming someone else. It's because the version of you that was built on adaptation and survival, now that version can no longer survive the truth of who you're becoming. And so when that happens, something powerful starts to unfold, right? You begin the process of learning who you are without the roles, without the performance. Yes, the caterpillar to the butterfly, right? Without the pressure to be everything for everyone. And that's when the real work of transformation begins. But yeah, Joanne, until then, we tired, right? That's what we talked about yesterday. Tired of being the only healed one in the room. Tired of being the strong one. Tired of being the only one who's emotionally mature. And the thing about rebirth is it doesn't always feel positive at first. And this is the part that people don't want to talk about when they talk about transformation. When we hear words like healing and growth or rebirth, we tend to imagine something uplifting, right? Our mind immediately goes to something empowering, something that feels like clarity and peace and confidence all arriving at the same time. Hey, Nicole, welcome in, girl. Right? But when you really understand real rebirth, you understand that it rarely begins that way. In fact, the early stages of palingenesis can feel deeply uncomfortable. And someone said that the caterpillar to the butterfly. Honey, I don't know if y'all have ever seen that process when the caterpillar goes into that chrysalis phase, when it's in the cocoon and it turns into that ooey gooey mess. If you've ever watched that transition, that looks uncomfortable because it is transforming from one creature to an entire another. And so again, the early stages of palingenesis can feel deeply uncomfortable because the old version of you starts to fall away, right? You don't immediately step into the new one with certainty. You think that caterpillar knows what's going down? Do you think that caterpillar, knows that the next way that it gets from point A to point B is to fly? Right? So we have to understand that, with palingenesis, it's the same, right? There's often this period of in between, a season where you're no longer who you used to be, but you're still trying to figure out who you're becoming. It's your chrysalis phase. And that space can feel very confusing. You might find yourself questioning things that you've never questioned before. Relationships that once felt normal suddenly feel draining. Conversations that used to feel easy now feel forced. Environments that once felt familiar now suddenly feel misaligned. And sometimes the hardest part is realizing that the version of you that kept things stable, that kept things peaceful, that kept things predictable is now the version of you that is dissolving. Don says, I'm in my chrysalis phase. I think a lot of us are, Don. And welcome in, Ra. Right? So, now that version of us, that old version of us starting to dissolve in that chrysalis phase, instead of feeling like freedom, we feel uncertainty. And this is the phase where, you might think, why does everything feel different? Why do I suddenly feel uncomfortable in spaces I used to feel fine? Why does it feel like my whole life is shifting? But what's actually happening is that your awareness is expanding, right? What's really happening is that for the first time, you are seeing things more clearly. And clarity at first, if we're being honest, can feel heavy, right, Brooks? The anxiety. And that's because clarity forces you to acknowledge truths that you may have once ignored to keep the peace. So that's why you feel that tension, right? That's why things feel scary, Carmen. Because now you're beginning to notice patterns. You're beginning to notice different dynamics. You're beginning to notice the ways that you've been showing up in situations that don't honor your growth anymore. And with that awareness often comes grief. Grief for relationships that no longer feel aligned. Grief for opportunities or paths that once felt certain but now feel incomplete. Grief for the version of yourself that that carried way too much for too long. Even if that version of you was built on survival, we still mourn them, because that version, that person got us through. That version helped us to navigate seasons that we weren't fully equipped to handle at that time. So when that identity begins to fall away, there can be this quiet sadness that comes with it. Fearless, welcome in, beautiful. And that's normal, right? Because healing doesn't erase the past. It simply changes how you carry it. But here's the important thing to remember in this stage. Confusion does not mean that you are moving in the wrong direction. Let me repeat that. Confusion does not mean you are moving in the wrong direction. Discomfort does not mean that something is wrong. Sometimes those feelings are simply a sign that something inside of you is reorganizing, right? That your priorities are shifting. Your awareness is expanding. And, it just simply means that your identity is realigning with the truth of who you are becoming. Not who you were, not who you had to be, but who you are becoming. And while that process may not feel positive at first, it's often the exact space where rebirth begins to take shape. Tila, welcome in. Yes. Once the old version of you releases its grip, the new version of you finally has room to breathe. Now, I also want to talk about something that can be a little uncomfortable, but y'all know we all about the real in here, okay? I want to talk about the mask falling off. Sometimes when people stop pretending to be nice, what emerges isn't healing. It is simply their mask falling off. And those are two very different things. And I think that we tend to confuse them, because when someone says, I'm just being real now, that doesn't automatically mean that they've done the work of self-awareness and accountability and emotional maturity. Sometimes it simply means that they've stopped performing the version of themselves that made other people comfortable. And I know you've probably seen this before, right? Someone appeared kind in the beginning and suddenly they seem dismissive. Someone who once seemed supportive and loving and encouraging suddenly becomes critical. Thank you for the roses. Someone who once played the role of the peacemaker suddenly reveals patterns of manipulation and control or cruelty. And when confronted, they may say something like, oh, this is just the real me. Or I'm done pretending, I'm matching energy now. I'm done people pleasing, right? But again, the truth that we don't always talk about is that authenticity doesn't require harming others. Authenticity does not require disrespect. Authenticity does not require abandoning empathy. See, healing makes someone more direct. Healing may make somebody more boundaried. Healing may make someone less available for chaos. But genuine growth rarely makes someone careless with other people's humanity. So when someone drops the nice version of themselves and replaces it with harshness and selfishness or disregard for others, what we're often witnessing isn't a rebirth, it is exposure, right? And those are two very different things. They simply stopped performing. Their representative that initially showed up has left the building. And what has always been underneath has finally surfaced. Sometimes people wear kindness as strategy. They wear, this cloak of kindness as a way to be liked, as a way to gain your trust, as a way to maintain control of how other people perceive them. But when the situation changes, when they no longer need that image, when they isolate you, right? then all of a sudden that kindness cloak comes off. And it's no longer required for them to maintain that. And that's when their mask slips off. And suddenly, for you, the energy feels different. The tone changes. The behavior shifts. And it can leave other people confused, thinking, where did this come from? Right? Who is this person? For some, we're like, this is not the person that I fell in love with. This is not the friend that I've had for years. This is not the mentor or the person that I've been going to for years. Like, who are you? And so suddenly that energy begins to feel different. Their tone changes. The behavior changes. But often, the truth is, it didn't suddenly appear. It was just simply hidden, right? Now, this doesn't mean that people can't grow or change, right? Everybody has the capacity to evolve. Everyone. But real transformation usually includes accountability. Ms. Blessed, welcome in. Real transformation includes accountability. Real transformation includes reflection. I'm hitting it on the spot today. Good. Real transformation includes the willingness to ask the question, how do my actions impact those around me? See, without awareness, what somebody calls authenticity may really just be unchecked behavior finally revealed. Unique Creations, welcome in. Thank you for the heart me. And see, part of your own healing journey is learning to recognize the difference. Because sometimes the most important rebirth happening in a situation is not theirs, it is yours. Sometimes other people's mask falling off is not to expose them, but it is to awaken something in you. Right? It's the moment where, you stop confusing performance with character and you start seeing people clearly for who they actually are. Real rebirth usually creates more awareness, not less. So when someone is truly going through the process of transformation, one of the biggest signs isn't perfection, it's awareness. Real rebirth doesn't suddenly make somebody flawless. It doesn't mean that they never make a mistake again. It doesn't mean that they always get everything right. Right? To err is human. We all make mistakes, right? But it does mean that they begin to see themselves more clearly. They start noticing their own patterns. They start recognizing their own triggers. They start understanding how their words, their choices, and their reactions impact the people around them. And that awareness changes how, they move throughout the world. Someone who is genuinely healing may become more boundaried. Yes, absolutely. They may become more selective about, where they place their time, their energy, and their emotional investments. They may stop over-explaining themselves. They may become quieter in spaces that, demanded their constant emotional labor. But even with those boundaries, they're usually still moving with intentionality, right? Asking themselves questions like, am I responding from growth or from old wounds? Zoe Renee, welcome in. Am I being honest or am I being reactive? Is this boundary protecting my peace or am I building walls to keep everybody else out? Because real growth invites reflection. It invites a deeper relationship with yourself. And the more self-aware that somebody becomes, the more meaningful they tend to be with their actions. They recognize that healing isn't just about feeling better. It's about being better with what they know now. And that doesn't mean that they shrink themselves to keep other people comfortable, because we're not doing that, right? It doesn't mean that you have to tolerate the disrespect. It doesn't mean that you have to abandon your boundaries. But it does mean that you have to move with a level of consciousness that wasn't present before. Shane, welcome in. Yeah, we're not doing that, Sela. So now that we have this higher level of consciousness, now that we know better, so we're doing better, we got to start pausing before reacting. We listen without assuming. We acknowledge when we've hurt someone, even if it was never our intent to hurt someone, right? Because intention doesn't erase offense. We take responsibility for choices. See, that's the important difference. Because when someone claims that they're evolving, but their behavior shows less awareness, less empathy, or, less accountability than before, that's usually not growth. That is someone avoiding the deeper work. So we have to understand that true rebirth tends to expand a person's understanding of themselves and their impact on the world around them. True rebirth softens the ego. It deepens the heart and creates the kind of strength that doesn't require dominance or control, cruelty to prove itself. It's a quieter strength, a grounded strength, the kind that says, I know who I am, I know what I value, and I am committed to living in alignment with that, even when it requires me to grow. We have to understand that sometimes somebody else's unmasking is our clarity. I think that one of the most difficult parts of growth is realizing that not every situation or not every revelation in your life is about your transformation. Sometimes the clarity comes from, through somebody else's behavior. There are moments when a person that you once trusted, begins to move differently. Maybe they stop showing the same care for you that they once did. Maybe they respect the respect that they used to, feel natural suddenly disappears. Maybe the kindness that you thought defined their character begins to feel inconsistent or conditional, right? And like when that first happens, at first it can be confusing. You may try to explain it away. You might tell yourself, they're just going through a hard time. Maybe I misunderstood them, or maybe I'm being too sensitive. Because when someone has played a certain role in your life for a long time, it is really hard to imagine them being different from the first version, right? The version that you've known. But sometimes what you're witnessing isn't a sudden change. Sometimes it's simply just a clearer view. The mask is no longer being maintained. Have an amazing day, Ghost. Thank you so much for being here, bro. Right? The mask that they once wore is no longer being maintained. The performance has ended. Right? And what's underneath, what they've been hiding or suppressing for so long underneath, finally is visible. And I mean, if we're being honest, that realization hurts. There is sadness that comes with that. Because when someone reveals a side of themselves that doesn't align with respect and care and the integrity that you believe that they had, it forces you to rethink everything. It forces you to reevaluate the entire dynamic of things. It forces you to now ask those difficult questions about, what you're willing to tolerate moving forward. Clarity, even when it's uncomfortable, is still a form of growth. Elevated Awakening Z, welcome in, love. Miss Gorgeous, I see you. Welcome in. Clarity, even when it is uncomfortable, is a form of growth. Because once you see something clearly, you can no longer pretend that you don't. You begin to notice the patterns that you once overlooked. You begin to recognize behaviors that once felt subtle, but now feel obvious. Okay, tuning in from Panama. Right? And that awareness gives you something powerful. It gives you a choice. Right? The choice to create distance where necessary. The choice to redefine your boundaries. The choice to stop extending access to people who no longer move with the same care or integrity that you value. And here's the deeper truth. In moments like this, sometimes the rebirth happening in the situation isn't theirs, it's yours. Right? It's the moment that you move from confusion to clarity, from giving the benefit of doubt endlessly to honoring what your spirit now recognizes as the truth. It's the moment that you stop trying to make someone else's behavior make sense. And instead of, focusing on them and this shift that they're going through, you begin to focus on protecting your peace. Welcome, Andrea. And while that shift can feel difficult, it's often one of the most empowering stages of personal growth, right? Because seeing clearly allows you to start living more intentionally. And intentional living is one of the quiet signs that your own rebirth is already underway. But you have to understand, and Brooks, I want you to listen. You have to understand that your rebirth might require outgrowing old roles. This is a very key part in Palingenesis, okay? Palingenesis. Your rebirth might require outgrowing old roles. This is one of the quiet realities of rebirth. It often requires you to step out of the roles that you've been carrying for years. Roles that once defined how people see you. Roles that shaped how people expected you to behave. Roles that may have even become part of your identity. You might have been the one that everybody called when something went wrong. You might be the one who fixed problems, the one who kept the peace in the room, the one who absorbed the emotional weight of everybody else's chaos, the dependable one, the strong one, the one who never complained. And for a long time, those roles might have even felt like a badge of honor. You might have taken pride in being the reliable one, the one that people could lean on, the one who always showed up. But eventually, something begins to shift. You start realizing that being everything for everyone else often means abandoning parts of yourself. And when you start to realize that, you start to see that you've been sacrificing your rest, your boundaries, your needs, your voice, You begin to notice how often you've said yes when you're exhausted. How often you've stayed silent to keep the peace. How often you've carried responsibilities that were never meant to be yours in the first place. And that awareness can be uncomfortable, because the moment you begin stepping out of those roles, the dynamics around you start to change, right? The people who benefited from your constant availability might feel confused. Some may feel disappointed. Some may even accuse you of changing, right? They'd be saying things like, you're not the same anymore. You used to be so easy to talk to. You've always taken care of that for me. They tell you now that you become distant. But what they are often reacting to is not your absence, but the absence of the version of you that made their life easier. The version of you that overextended. The version of you that kept saying yes. The version of you that carried everybody else's emotional responsibilities as if they were yours to hold on to. And so stepping away from those roles can feel unfamiliar at first, because when you've spent years defining yourself by how much you can do for others, learning to prioritize your own well-being can feel unnatural. But this is often where Palingenesis, the real rebirth, begins to take shape. Not strength as endless sacrifice, right? But you really start redefining what strength actually means, right? Strength as self-respect. You begin recognizing that being supportive doesn't require self-erasure. That being compassionate doesn't mean tolerating everything. That being dependable doesn't mean abandoning your own needs. And, this is the time where you slowly start creating a life where your presence is no longer built on overexhaustion. It is now built on alignment, where the roles that you carry reflect who you are truly, not just who everyone else expects you to be, right? And while that shift can be uncomfortable for people who are, who were used to the old you, it is often the necessary step in becoming someone who lives with clarity and balance and intention. Because rebirth doesn't just change how you see yourself, it changes how you choose to show up for the world. And rebirth is less about reinvention and more about revelation. See, I think when people hear the word transformation, they often imagine something dramatic, like some complete reinvention, a brand new personality, a whole new life that looks nothing like the one that it came from. But real rebirth, real palingenesis, usually isn't about becoming someone completely different. More often, it's about revealing the version of you that was already there beneath the surface. The version of you that had been quiet. The version of you that had been adjusting. The version of you that had been adapting to survive certain environments and expectations and relationships. Thank you for the follow, Shay. Welcome in. Many of you learned that being outspoken made people uncomfortable, so you became quieter. Maybe you learned that expressing your needs caused conflict, so you adapted and became more accommodating. Maybe you learned that showing vulnerability felt unsafe, so you became the strong one who never needed help. And over time, all of those adjustments, all of those accommodations started to feel like identity. Began to believe that the roles you learned to play were simply who you are, right? That's your character. That's just who you are as a person. But as you grow, as you heal, as your awareness expands, something deeper begins to surface. You start noticing parts of yourself that have been pushed aside. Your voice, your creativity, your boundaries, your curiosity, your desire to live with more honesty and intention. And sometimes those parts of you can feel unfamiliar at first. Not because they're new, but because they have never had the room to exist, right? They haven't had room to breathe in so long. And see, this is why rebirth often feels less like an invention and more like remembering. Remembering what your intuition sounds like. Remembering what your passions feel like. Remembering the things that once made you feel alive before you started shaping yourself around everybody else's expectations. And as those pieces begin to re-emerge, something powerful starts to happen. You start living less from performance and more from alignment. You stop trying to be impressive. You start focusing on being honest. You stop trying to maintain an image and you start prioritizing authenticity. And, you know, the life that begins to take shape from that place doesn't necessarily look louder or more dramatic, but it definitely feels truer. It feels more grounded, more peaceful, more connected to the person that you actually are. That's the quiet power of rebirth. It doesn't always change everything outside, on the outside immediately, but it changes the relationship you have with yourself. And when that relationship becomes rooted in truth instead of performance, everything else in your life begins to realign around it. So we have to begin to understand that every breakdown doesn't mean that you're losing yourself. I think one of the hardest parts of transformation is the moment when things start shifting and we're not quite sure what that means yet, right? When the relationships change, when environments start to feel uncomfortable, when the version of your life that once felt stable suddenly feels uncertain. In those moments, many people just immediately assume the worst, right? We start thinking something must be wrong. We think that we're losing ourselves. We think that, somehow we're failing at life because everything doesn't feel as clear as it once did. But sometimes the truth is the opposite. Sometimes you're not losing yourself at all. Sometimes you're losing the identities that helped you survive certain seasons. The version of you that tolerated more than they should have. The version of you that stayed silent just to keep the peace. The version of you that accepted less than you deserved just to maintain stability. See, those identities may have served a purpose at one point because they helped you to navigate situations, where you didn't yet have the language, the support, or the confidence to do things differently. Papa Smurf, hello, brother. Right? So those identities served a purpose at a point. And we have to understand that there's no shame in that. We all develop ways of adapting to the environments that we find ourselves in. But as you grow, as your awareness expands, as your understanding of yourself deepens, those old identities start to feel tight, like clothes that you've outgrown. They no longer fit the person that you are becoming. And when that happens, life sometimes creates the kind of pressure that forces things to change, right? Certain relationships may shift. Certain opportunities may fall away. Certain dynamics may begin to dissolve. And in the middle of that, it feels like everything is falling apart. But sometimes what's really happening is that space is being created, right? Space for truth, space for healthier boundaries, space for new opportunities that match the version of you that is emerging, space for a life that no longer requires you to shrink just to belong. And while that process may feel uncomfortable, it's often a necessary part of your rebirth. Because rebirth doesn't always begin with excitement. Sometimes it begins with letting go. And when I say letting go, sometimes it begins with letting go of identities that no longer serve you. Letting go of expectations that were never truly yours. Letting go of environments that can no longer support your growth. And when you release those things, something powerful happens. You start discovering that the version of yourself you thought you were losing was never the real you to begin with. What's emerging is someone more honest, more aligned, more aware of what they value and what they're no longer willing to carry. So if you're in a season where things feel uncertain, where parts of your life feel like they're shifting or maybe dissolving, don't automatically assume that something is wrong. Sometimes the breakdown is simply clearing space for the next version of you to rise. And that process, as uncomfortable as it may be, is often the beginning of becoming exactly who you were meant to be. So again, today's word, Palingenesis, the rebirth after collapse, renewal after something breaks down. But if there's one thing that I want you to take with you after this conversation today, it's this. Rebirth is rarely neat. It doesn't always look like inspirational quotes and fresh starts. Sometimes rebirth looks like confusion. Sometimes it looks like distancing yourself from people that you once felt close to. Sometimes it looks like sitting quietly with yourself, realizing that the life you built no longer fits the person you're becoming. Because the truth is, we get comfortable with identities that we've been carrying, even the identities that were built for our survival, right? They were simply built for us to survive that season. So the helper, the peacemaker, the strong one who never needed anything, those were identities that were built on survival. But eventually, those identities begin to crack under the weight of the truth. And when they do, it can feel like something inside of you is falling apart. But here's the perspective shift that I want to leave you with today. Not every breakdown is destruction. Sometimes the breakdown is exposure. Exposure of the roles that you were never meant to carry forever. Exposure of patterns that no longer align with who you're becoming. Exposure of people whose masks have finally fallen away so you can see them clearly. And as uncomfortable as that clarity can be, it is also powerful. Because once you see clearly, you begin living differently. Once you stop forcing connections that drain you, you stop performing identities that require you to shrink. You stop carrying responsibilities that were never yours to hold. Now, slowly, something new can begin to emerge. And it's not a completely different person. It's just a more honest version of you. A version that is less concerned with performing for approval and more committed to living in alignment with the truth. And that's the quiet beauty of Palingenesis, right? It reminds us that rebirth isn't always about dramatic reinvention. Sometimes it's just about releasing what was never truly you. Sometimes it's about allowing masks, yours or someone else's, to fall away so clarity can finally take its place. So again, if you're in a season where things feel like they're shifting, where parts of your life feel uncertain, where the version of you that once held everything together no longer feels sustainable, I want you to remember this. You may not be losing yourself. You may simply be standing at the threshold of a rebirth. And rebirth often requires letting go of what can no longer hold the truth of who you're becoming. So just breathe through it. Be patient with the process. Give yourself permission to grow, to question, and to evolve without rushing the outcome. Because sometimes the most powerful transformation doesn't happen loudly, it happens quietly. And the moment you decide that living honestly matters more than maintaining the performance, and that moment, that shift towards truth, is often where the real rebirth begins. Now, before we close out, as always, I want to leave you all with a little extra love and light. I am here to encourage you to keep breathing through the highs, the lows, and every moment in between. I want you to keep choosing peace, even if it feels out of reach. And know that here at the Self-Care Club, you will always be seen, always valued, and always supported. So don't be afraid to take up space, speak your truth, and make a little room for you to breathe. I love each and every one of you to life. And I am praying that your day is not just amazing, but aligned, intentional, and yes, on purpose. For those of you who are seeking a healing community with other like-minded individuals who are healing out loud, I welcome you to join our Room2Breathe community powered by School. You can access the link by, clicking the link in my bio, or simply by visiting my website at theselfcareclub.org. Okay. It is a healing community, just a space for us to continue to heal out loud, to keep these conversations going. So again, check out the link in my bio or visit our website at selfcareclub.org for more details. It is a free community, open to everyone. I look forward to connecting with you guys all again soon. We will be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the podcast. For those of you who are joining from TikTok, we will be live at 8:30 a.m. with a little pre-podcast party. For those of you who are on YouTube and Facebook, we encourage you to join us also on TikTok for the after party, because there's a whole show that you guys miss out on in the end. Little Q&A, whole lot of motivation. So you guys are welcome to join us. My handle is the same across all platforms. So wherever you are looking for us, just search Room2Breathe Project. You will find us there. I have all of the links on the website as well and in my bio. So stay connected. I love you guys, and I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Me, I